Hey, what's up? It's Deanna. So, today I'm going to show you how to date antique photographs. Now, I might add that I am not an expert, but I've been collecting photographs and things from the Victorian era for long enough to realize how, in my way, I date photographs. So, here we have two Victorian albums here and just a pack of, like a stack of cabinet cards. So, about 1860-ish, I believe, possibly even a little earlier, they made photographs called tintypes. And tintypes are actually photographs actually not on tin but on iron. So it was a painted piece of iron, and the photo was developed on that. And the painted piece of iron was painted black, but they called them tintypes. Now, I'm not sure of the reasoning behind that. There is a explanation for why they called them tintypes, but here's an example of how I can date these and how I could figure out around what era and what time frame that these particular tintypes were made. Now, tintypes were very inexpensive, and that was when photography was starting to become affordable for the masses. Now, at one point, photography was only for wealthier people. So, well, and by the way, I'm wearing gloves. And one of the things you need to do when you handle these old photographs is not to get your fingerprint oil on them. Now, you're figuring these photographs are well over 100 years old. If you get your fingerprint oils on them, you can destroy the photos. So here's some examples of Victorian time frame tintype photos, and I'm going to show you how I date them. So let me zoom in here. Okay, so you see the clothing? The clothing actually helps you to date your photos. So these are telling me that this is sometime in the 1870s and 1880s. Ladies wore tighter dresses with bustles on the back. And so this is telling me this is probably about the late 1870s, 1880s. Here's another example of that time frame, and you can tell by the clothing. Also, hairstyles. Women actually help you date photographs. Men pretty much wore the same style. So here's some examples of the tintypes in my collection. Now I have hundreds of them actually from all different time frames and eras. Now tintypes actually continued to be used. They were very popular all the way up into the early 20th century. And they went out of favor when actual cameras became very affordable, like Kodak cameras. Then people started to be able to get things developed on their own, and it was very inexpensive and cost effective. So a lot of times too with tintype photographs, towards the 1880s, I noticed that they had like a lot of people would go to say carnivals or places of gatherings, like if there was like a large exposition, which a lot of states had these expositions that traveled, or the carnivals. They were very affordable. So people would go and they would get their photograph taken, and they were very, very cheap. And so here's examples of the 1880s, I believe. And I'm guessing by the ladies' outfits and hairstyles. Now, some of them actually, since these were very cheap photographs, some of them actually, people would pay extra to have the photographer hand tint the cheeks since these were never in color. So this one shows that somebody paid extra to the photographer, which sometimes costs more than the actual photograph, to have their cheeks tinted. So I thought that was interesting that, and I would share that with you. Let me see. Hold on one second. If I could show you now, if you notice, these ladies have tinted cheeks, and they paid extra for that service. And same thing with this, you can see their cheeks are tinted. So now the next type of photograph I want to show you are Carte de Visites, or CDVs. And these were actually popular sometime in the 1870s. These became more popular. And you can actually date them because of the sizes were much larger. So as photography was getting less costly, people would actually get larger photographs. So you can see here, this is about 1890, I'd say. And also the Carte de Visites, or CDVs, which I'll call them for the rest of this video. Generally, you can date the later photos after the Civil War, because a lot of the photography studios would actually put their logo or information and addresses on the front of these photos. So here's an example here, probably about 1890 or so. And also you would see like the studio information on the backs of these cards, and they were quite large. They did come in different sizes. Another neat thing about these CDV photos was a lot of them were called visiting cards. So when somebody visited somebody, they would actually leave one of these cards with their photo, and it was like considered polite back in the Victorian era to actually leave like a calling card and of your visit to somebody. So here's some more CDVs. Now this one is clearly probably from the 1880s, and the reasoning for that is look at her puffy sleeves, and that was like a balloon sleeve that ladies wore around that time, sometime in the 1880s. And as you can see again on the bottom, we have the information from the photography studio, which helps me to date this, that this is definitely not Civil War time frame. This is the late Victorian era. Sometimes the studio did not put their information on the back, and it was only in one spot and on the front. Sorry for the bad lighting. I'm doing this inside the house. Here's another example. Now I'm going to show you something. A lot of elderly women or older women used to actually they still had their clothing left over from the 1860s and 70s, and they weren't as much of slaves to fashion as the younger ladies. So this lady is clearly wearing her 1860s style garb or 1870s style garb, but this was probably done sometime in the 1880s or 1890s. So you see also on the bottom of the card, we have the studio name and the state or the area or the town that the studio was located. And you can see it's a much larger card. And I'll show you the difference between the Civil War time frame photographs and how much smaller the photos were. On the back, we have the studio information. Here's another older lady who's actually wearing clothing from the 1870s. And again, she was not a slave to fashion. She carried it over all the way into the 1880s and 1890s by wearing her clothes from the 1870s. Now, clothing was very expensive back then, and people actually tended to hang on to their clothing and take good care of them over the years. Here's the studio information on the front. And let me try to get a focus on that. There we go. And on the back of this card, there is no info. Now here's another very elderly gentleman who's wearing clothing from the 1870s, but this card was probably taken sometime in the 1880s. And there's no studio information on the front of the card, but you can clearly see this is not a Civil War era photograph. On the back, the studio information is actually gold leafed and placed there. This lady is probably sometime from the 1880s or 1890s. Now, see the foxing on this? Now, this does happen over time. Old photographs degrade. And one of the things that you need to do if you're collecting old photographs is keep them out of direct sunlight, out of bright lights and away from lamps, and keep them in a cool, dark place with very little humidity. You can get acid-free paper and wrap them in there, or place them in an old cedar trunk away from humidity, light, heat, and cold. So keep it in a temperate climate. Now this lady, this is clearly from the 1880s. A lot of ladies wore very poofy type of tops on their dresses and poofy sleeves. And again, we have the studio information here. Now, as you can see, I have a huge, huge stack of cards. I don't know if you want to see them all, but the next one I'm going to show you is how some studios actually did a bad job on tinting the cheeks. And this was a terrible job, as you can see here. The particular photography studio was probably a very inexpensive operation. They didn't have the state-of-the-art equipment, and the actual photographer who took this photo did not do a good job of hand tinting the cheeks. She almost looks clownish and like she's wearing too much rouge. And actually, it was an art for them to hand tint these photographs. And this guy clearly did not actually master that art. So let me go on now to show you, because you're probably getting bored by now, an 1860s, 1870s photo album. Now you can see the difference in size compared to this album, which is an earlier bunch of photographs. As the decades moved on, the albums got much larger. And so you generally, like the photographs in the albums from the 1860s and 1870s, were in these beautiful leather-bound books that were much smaller, and they generally had high relief and metalwork on them. And a lot of them had clasps made out of metal that kept the books closed. Now, over the years, a lot of them go missing, and in this instance, it has gone missing. Now, you can see the edges of the pages of the album are gold-leafed, and a lot of these earlier books had gold-leafed edging on the edges of the pages. Now, here's the back, and again, you can see how well made this book was. Now, as the decades progressed, the books became much cheaper made. A lot of them did not use leather, or they used celluloid to have the book covered. And the bindings weren't as well made as the 1860s, 1870s books. So I'll show you the difference. So as we open this book, you can see it is very, very well made. And you can see the book already has a border going around each of the cardboard pages. And you would slide the photograph inside this little slit here. Now on these books, they had it as well, but it wasn't as well done as the other books. These type of books, they're prone to ripping and the pages getting very brittle. So again, here's a later CDV, and this is probably the era of about 1870, like the late 1870s and the early 1880s, and you can tell by the clothing. Okay, so let's get to the Civil War and the 1870s time frame. So as you can see now, the style of the photographs were actually done in what's called albumen, I believe. Albumen. Don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. And you can see the major difference in the clothing that the ladies wore. The ladies wore very, very large skirts. As you can see here, look at the width of her skirt. It's like almost like bell-shaped and balloon-shaped. And that's how you can generally tell 1860s and 1870s type of ladies' clothing. Now, a lot of ladies did not have bangs in the 1860s, and starting in around the 1870s, they started to wear their hair in bangs. Here's another 1860s photograph, and as you can see here, look how ballooned out her skirt is, and she does not have a bustle like the 1870s and 1880s dresses. And as you can see here, she does not have bangs, and a lot of ladies wore their hair parted down the center, and they wore their hair up. The gentlemen are pretty much the same in every decade. They always wore like suits, but also another style that you look for earlier photographs is men had mutton chops, or those really thick sideburns, and you can see that here. Again, this is definitely an 1860s photo, and you can tell by her dress. Look how wide her skirt is and bell-shaped. Again, her hair is up and away from her face. She has no hair on her forehead, and her hair is parted down the center. The gentleman here also has mutton chops and sideburns. That's not to say that men in the 1870s and 1880s didn't do that, but it's more so in that time frame. Again, we have a gentleman that has mutton chops here, and that's clearly denoting the 1860s, 1870s. Here's another 1860s lady with that big balloon, bell-shaped skirt, and she has no bangs. Again, we have a Civil War era lady wearing that big balloon-shaped dress, bell-shaped. Her hair is up, parted down the center, no hair on the bangs. So this generally helps you date your photographs. Also, the Civil War photographs were much shorter and smaller. As you can see the difference here in size. And so I hope my video was interesting and you got to see some really old Victorian photographs and really interesting things tonight. And if you like what you see, hit the thumbs up and subscribe. And you can check out some of my other videos because I have a lot of photographs from the Victorian era. Going back from the past summer, I showed at least 15 albums from all different eras in the Victorian time frame, from the 1860s going up to about 1890, and some as late as the early 20th century from about 1900. So thanks for watching and have a great day or a great evening wherever you are in the world.